Welcome to episode 2 of 5 Things You Should Know About Indonesia. Today, I'm very lucky to have the opportunity to speak to Ian Betts. Ian and I go back some time now, and we regularly meet up in Jakarta and talk about all things Indonesia, typically on the political and business side. But today we're going to be talking about something very interesting. We're going to be talking about societal and cultural norms in Indonesia, and I don't think anyone else is placed better to speak about this than Ian. A bit of background on Ian. Ian is a research and development advisor at Castle Asia, which is a premier political advisory consultancy in Jakarta. And prior to that, Ian was the director for Southeast Asia at Hill and Associates, a global risk and crisis management consultancy. Ian, thanks so much for joining me today.
My pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Perfect. As I sort of alluded to at the sort of intro, you're going to be speaking to us today about societal and cultural norms in Indonesia. It'd be great to hear maybe, some words from you about what that means to you and, where your perspectives come from.
Well, for me, it all began way back in the 80s when I was first at university. So I studied the humanities and primarily politics, philosophy, some literature, and the courses I was taking. I took a module in revolutions, would you believe? So this was the 80s, and I was pretty fired up by that time. Soviet Union was still in place. Deng Xiaoping's China was modernizing fast, but things were very dynamic. We'd had the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. ASEAN was up and running and becoming something significant. We'd had the crisis in Vietnam, Cambodia. I was living in London. I was a student. We'd seen an influx of Vietnamese boat people, as they were called, coming from that crisis there. So for me, it was kind of around me, but it was also at university, and it's those years that really fired my imagination about China, Southeast Asia, and really put the idea in my mind that I should go out to Southeast Asia and try, primarily China, it was for me originally. So I studied something called comparative communist politics, which, as you can imagine, is not something you tell the immigration agent on arrival, with your backpack. And, that's something I kept to myself. But, that's just the name. But behind all that was the studies in the international relations and modern history of Southeast Asia, China, focusing on communism internationally. And I focused quite heavily on the Soviet Union and China and the Sino-Soviet conflict. That was the subject of my thesis. And much of that thesis concerned Southeast Asia and the growing communist parties of the Southeast Asian countries, of which Indonesia was a very large one. So I was intrigued to come out here, and eventually I did. I had a job lined up with VSO in China, teaching English in remote locations, teaching English to English teachers. Now, I'd done English language teaching as a student, as a holiday job. I'd done a lot of what was then called TEFL, teaching English as a foreign language in my holidays and downtime. So that's what got me this job with VSO. Cutting a long story short, I found myself in Jakarta and was ready to go into China and take that opportunity. But and I'd arrived in 1992, and in my hand was my copy of Christopher Cock's The Year of Living Dangerously. And of course, that was, everything I've just been talking about in a nutshell. So here I am arriving in Jakarta, going through the motions of the book, look, the British Embassy on Hotel Indonesia, roundabout the Hotel Indonesia itself, finding the circle bar still there in the hotel as depicted in the book. So there I was, thinking, wow, now I've made it. Here I am in the middle of it all. And I worked in English language training in Jakarta for a few short months, but then I was offered a 2-year fixed-term contract with an oil and gas company, LASMO, London and Scottish Marine Oil. This was early 1993. And I remember calling up my dad. I was still relatively young. I was in my 20s still. Called up my dad, and I asked his advice. Do you think I should take it? Because I wasn't expecting to be here really long term. And I'd had the opportunity in China and thought I may well get another one. So he kind of suggested I should take it because the money was crazy for someone of that age and that level of maturity, which was pretty low, I should tell you, at that time. So I took it. 2 years, a lot of work. I learned how to work in offices. I learned the way of work in Indonesia, the way of bureaucracy and administration in those 2 short years. I learned a lot about field work. Speedboats, helicopters, oil rigs, vessels. I know a lot about downtime on oil and gas camps and how that can be and what it does to you. Very intensive work and training English language programs for hundreds of hours at a time. I learned all about that very quickly over those 2 years. By the end of it, I'd already met a girl. And that was a factor I wasn't expecting, but we got married at the end of that contract. That was 95. So by then, I'd been here a couple of years. I was soaking up the atmosphere very fast. I'd started Bahasa Indonesia lessons in evening classes. When I wasn't in the field, I was in Jakarta, and I took evening classes at I'll give it a plug, the IALF, the Indonesia Australia Language Foundation. It was great.
Wow.
Really set me on my way.
Is that still around you?
I think it still is, because I've recommended that to other people, young people that I've brought into work and recruited, and they've also done well there. So it's a good foundation for people who do want to learn Bahasa. For me, that was the key. Learning Bahasa in the early 90s was a key advantage. And after I finished that contract, and I did a couple more years in English language training, short-term contracts for companies like PT Badak in Bontang in Kalimantan, Total Indonesia also in Kalimantan, East Kalimantan, that kind of thing. Then I went into consulting. That's when things got really interesting. I'd gone into consulting as a writer-researcher. That was the job I applied for. And within a week, I guess I'd had such a lot of exposure to work environments in Indonesia, in the field, in Jakarta. The company put me client-facing almost immediately, and I started working with clients. And that was in 97. And very quickly, we saw the onrush of the financial crisis, the Asia financial crisis, which very quickly morphed into the 1998 and the political crisis. So I went through those short years, just got married, living in Jakarta, working in consulting with some very high-level companies on a low income, but starting to experience a great deal of uncertainty. Those years that we saw in 97, 98, the beginnings and the onset of Reformasi, the violence, unrest, and political change, transformation we saw. That's when I really thought that my studies back in the 80s, when I'd studied revolutions and that kind of political behavior, I often reflected back on that time and was looking for, a definition of what we were seeing in Indonesia. Did that constitute a revolution? I think in many ways it did. And that's what we saw in Reformasi. By that time, as someone who likes to read and values literature, art, fiction, even poetry, drama, the theatre, which I do and did, I'd already started to discover Indonesian artists and writers, and many of those artists were also transitioning into politics, becoming political spokespersons for Reformasi, different aspects of it, starting to work with politicians, and I fell in with one very deeply. A writer called Emha Ainun Najib, better known as Cak Nun, from East Java, a prolific writer of Islamic principally Islamic poetry, essays, prose, colossal dramas performed on enormous stages, open air, at pesantren gatherings of thousands in Java. So for me, none of this being translated into English and having very basic Bahasa, I was starting to see this juxtaposition between enormous political change and uncertainty and really not knowing where this was going, and a deep fascination with the arts and culture that I was also experiencing. And that's what I guess fascinated me, kept me here for much of my time. And I kept those relationships through all this time and those behaviors and activities which cross over not only into the written word. And, it's one thing to appreciate literature, artists, and writing, but it's another to have the opportunity to work physically with them, spend time with them, be part of their circles, participate with them, write with them, produce with them, be published when writing about them, as I have been since, and getting involved in their activities, which is a big part of what I do and have done for more than 25 years since that period, ever since that period of Reformasi. And I've stayed broadly in that political sphere ever since. So following 98, the financial crisis, the political crisis, I moved into, I went home for a year. I went back to the UK for 1 year. And I took a master's degree. It was 10 years after I arrived. I took a master's degree majoring in political risk analysis and political Islam, with a minor in governance, good governance, anti-corruption, decentralization, etc., and global governance, so WTO, global treaties, trade, etc. And all of that packaged together under one international studies master's degree at Exeter in the UK. So political Islam, focusing on radicalism, terrorism. It was principally focused on the Middle East, but I got permission from the faculty to orient my studies towards Southeast Asia, which they graciously allowed me to do. So I spent a year very intensively back in the UK, married by then and with a young daughter of 2 years old. So living on campus for a year, not working, saved up the money to do that. And I got back to Indonesia. Bear in mind, I just, I'd done my thesis was on autonomy daerah, regional autonomy, Indonesia's decentralization program, and also political Islam. The weekend I got back was the weekend of the first Bali bombing. So I realized, as I'd realized that political risk was something I wanted to get into in consulting, I soon saw that political Islam and the basis I now had in that, and the interest I'd spent in that in the foregoing 10 years, was going to be of value to me. And I moved into risk and security consulting with Hill and Associates, and I stayed with them for 16 years, 17 years, principally in Indonesia, but I also went back to the UK for them and did 2.5 years back in London to build out a global consulting operation for them. And I came back to Southeast Asia for almost 5 years, 4.5 years, 5 years, back to Thailand and lived there. And let me tell you, living in another Southeast Asian country, one that's also been influenced by the culture of Indianization that Indonesia's been subject to over the last 2,000 years through the influence of Hinduism, Buddhism, through the culture of Borobudur and Prambanan, and all of that we've seen, Sriwijaya, Majapahit, and all those cycles of culture and civilization that we've seen and know about. Your experience is much enriched if you see this from the purview of another Southeast Asian country. So looking at Borobudur and Prambanan, and then looking at Ayutthaya just outside Bangkok as well, and seeing the experience in Thailand of that culture was amazing. But I did come back to Indonesia. I came back in 2021 and did a few more years with Hill and Associates before moving to a very broad-based economic and political risk advisory firm, Castle Asia, with Jim Castle, who's been here more than 50 years. So we worked together on that. I've been a member of the Castle Asia Indonesia country program since 2009, which was the year of the second bombing of the JW Marriott and of the Ritz-Carlton. The twin bombings in 2009. We lost many around the room at a Castle Asia gathering on that date. and many were injured. And Hill and Associates came on as consultants to Carcelasia after that, and I joined the round table and stayed with them. Apart from those years when I was away in the UK and Thailand. But other than that, I was with them through the period and even through COVID. And I joined Jim in 2023. So that's really been the story of how I got into this work and how I was fortunate enough to match not only my first degree studies with the fascinating work of being here and getting into consulting in Indonesia, but also the master's degree in political risk and political Islam and governance, which kept me here and which has informed me ever since and given me the basis for what I've done since. And Indonesia has given me much, much more than that. It's given me my career. It's given me a professional focus. It's given me an incredible set of interests in literature, the arts and culture, and things that I've not seen done elsewhere, and haven't seen documented even too much outside very narrow circles in Indonesia. But it's also given me a family. My wife's Indonesian. We have a daughter who was dual nationality until she was 21. She has a British passport now, and she's in the UK, and she's just finished her own master's degree as well. So somewhat of a full cycle. She's committed to Indonesia, just as I am, but doesn't live here. But maybe I'll stop there and come up for air and let you ask some questions.
Yeah, thanks for that comprehensive overview, Ian. I mean, there's so many things I'd like to sort of double click on and explore more. But there was one thing that, I mean, maybe I could start off by just saying that I think that I totally agree about the sort of approach you took with learning Bahasa Indonesia first as a foreigner. I think that understanding Indonesian language is critical to understanding the country. I think that without the language, you will only ever understand so much. I mean, so much of understanding the culture, before you even get to sort of just staying abreast of news, but just understanding the culture and the flexibility of the language and the flexibility of day-to-day life, it all sort of ties in and goes hand in glove. So I think that was something that really resonated with me. But one thing that you just sort of mentioned briefly about the Pasan trends and gatherings of thousands of people, it would be good to sort of talk about the idea of gathering in Indonesia and how, people aren't really bound by strict calendars and schedules, but it's more of a fluid type of arrangement. It'd be great maybe if you could sort of explore that as
Mm.
part of our discussion on societal and cultural norms.
Yeah, I mean, that was my first real point about, how culture is social, not based on calendars. It's quite ironic because the gatherings I was talking about happen in Jakarta on a very strict calendar. I mean, it's every second Friday evening. If you go to Taman Ismail Marzuki, TIM, which many people know in Cikini, you will find a very large gathering. It's large gathering can be up to 1,000 or thousands. It's a gathering. It's ad hoc. People come from all backgrounds uh, and all kinds of interests, but they come and they gather around a very open, flat stage where I could call them performers. They're not really performers. They're proponents of dialogue. This is it's a very seemingly casual affair, but it's got strict rules of egalitarian contact, where people will sit for hours from the mid-evening right through the early hours and into dawn, seated, listening to dialogue, listening to spoken verse, poetry, uh, music. There will be music at different points. There will be small performances, spoken word performances, small dramas, all played out, fairly apparently casually. It's all seated. It's all on basically the same level. It would appear to be, if you listen to the chants and the Quranic readings that kick it off first of all, in the first hour or 90 minutes, it would appear to you to be Islamic, but it's extremely inclusive. All kinds of people go there, all kinds of generations. I've been going more than 20 years, and some of the people that I see regularly have had children and grandchildren in the time that I've been going, and they're taking their kids there now. And they go there because these gatherings were instigated by the writer I mentioned earlier, Emha Ainun Najib, and they gather under quite poetic titles. So the first gathering was in East Java in Jombang, and that was the Parambulan, the Field of the Full Moon. And there you'll have a gamelan orchestra. They'll be playing Javanese music. They'll be playing world music. They'll be playing all kinds of fusion music, mixing all kinds of styles, deliberately fast tempo, up tempo, slow and mournful, all kinds of music, sacred music, pop music, all kinds of music, interspersed with Quranic readings, if you can believe it, and all kinds of other short performances. And that's mirrored around the country. In Jakarta, we have one called Kenduri Cinta, the Feast of Love. These are motifs which are in origin Sufistic Islam. In Malang, in East Java, we have the Obor Ilahi, the Divine Torch. In Surabaya, we have Bambang Wetan, the Rise of the East. And these are all similar formats. A certain evening of every month, 1,000 or thousands of people will gather, seated on the floor. Performance, poetry, music, congregation, inclusivity, and the audience participate. So the audience, there will be a dialogue with the audience is not the word. It's difficult to find a word because the audience are just as participatory as the leaders of the dialogue on the stage, which is basically a very flat platform. So it's very egalitarian. And behind that is an entire body of literature and work. The theatre plays that have transformed the culture of Indonesia. The Lautan Jilbab, for example, the Sea of Veils, which was a major impact on the culture of the hijab in Indonesia when in the 80s and early 90s the hijab was much less common than it is now. In fact, it was looked down upon and discouraged in many communities. This theatre play, Lautan Jilbab, served to open up that discussion, and there were many, many others like that, and they were oppositional. This was the theatre of dissent. This was a way of opposing Suharto without being, well, at sometimes being chased by the police, but avoiding being chased by the police and the intelligence forces who were there at these gatherings during the Suharto years. And
So Ian, sorry, just a quick question: was this more of a grassroots organization, or was it sort of funded by the government? Did they receive permission from the authorities?
From anywhere. No permission, no funding, purely organic. If you can imagine a gathering, originally, this is before social media, pure word of mouth. But it soon became a feature for many, many years. It's been going on since 98. The one in Jakarta really started in 2000. And it's been going on ever since. And every week there's a different theme. It might be a broadly religious theme, a cultural theme, a political theme, something dedicated to change, transformation, positivity, and some way of altering for the good. Young people go, academics go, politicians go, young kiai and sheikhs go, young politicians go, old politicians go. President Prabowo has been to Kenduri Cinta several times. Gus Dur has appeared. Anies Baswedan showed up last year. We had a very good session with him. Very ad hoc. No permission, no request for approval, no formal license by the government.
It seems like it's almost as if it's the original car-free day, in Jakarta on a Sunday.
You should come and see. It's exactly like that. Yeah, except it's seated. Yeah, with
Yeah,
much less
that's
nylon and cycling shorts. Yeah.
yeah, I'm definitely guilty of wearing some nylon on a
Yeah.
concrete day. But this
Yeah.
sounds great. I
I'm
feel
sure.
terrible that I've never attended. I'm hearing
Yeah.
also themes of Kejawen, which is the infusion of
Yeah.
Javanese and pre-Islamic culture into Islam. It seems like there are themes of that sort of woven
Very much.
into this as well.
It's very Javanese. This writer is principally Javanese, drawn from the Javanese spirit. His writing is his poetry. Now, when you're learning a language, poetry, very short sentences which are quick to translate and understand and encapsulate, are often some of the easiest things to start with. And that was my experience as well. So I deliberately sought out this poetry, and it's deep and intense religious poetry, but it can be translated and understood. And then you can go on to more complicated essay and long form prose. But it is very, I would say, infused with Javanese motifs as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm also sort of seeing themes of mushwara. Mushwara is the sort of
Absolutely.
resolving, for those that are unaware, it's the resolving of disputes through coming to a
Yeah.
consensus. And this is something which is reflected even in the politics, correct?
It's an Islamic concept, mushara mufakat, so deliberation until consensus, and that's how it is. It's very open. It's consensual. It accepts all forms of opposition, and moderates and mediates among them. And it's as you would expect from something Javanese. It's geared towards harmony and squaring the circle, if you like, and achieving resolution, which it does, and then on to the next month. If you were there, you'd find a very well-oiled organizational machine, and this is happening across the country and outside of this country. And I don't want to stay on this theme for too long, but we've taken this outside. We've toured this in the UK, Germany, Finland, Malaysia, Australia, the Sacred Festival of Music in Morocco, in Fez, the Fez Festival of Sacred Music. So many countries around the world. I've been on many of those trips.
Mm. Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, just to sort of, I know that the conversation isn't political, but it's interesting that, for example, this idea of gathering, coming together, Mushwara as well, when people sort of look at the composition of the House of Representatives and see that, Pedro has a supermajority there, people sort of say, oh, this is authoritarianism or whatnot. But I guess for people like yourself, it's more viewed as this sort of Mushwara, coming to a consensus.
I mean, we accept that. I mean, that's the Indonesian way of democracy. It was like that. It's been like that as throughout the period of Reformasi. Coalitions grow. Politicians seek the comfort of large coalitions. They cement power. They dilute opposition, and they give that majority. Political parties here, we know from experience, can work well together and collaborate across all apparent ideologies and differences of opinion. They work well together. They seek each other out. They make coalitions among themselves that might surprise a political scientist from outside Indonesia, who may assume that only bedfellows of a certain ideology would want to collaborate. But here we find all manner of parties uh, uh, happily collaborating in power. So yeah, I mean, I think musharrah is a factor, and it's been a unitary factor as well. It's helped to prevent conflict and dispute among parties in a population for whom parliamentary democracy, electoral democracy, is still a fairly young process. So, if we look back at that process from for that very first difficult and shambolic election of 1999, it went very well. More than 50 parties contested that election, but it went remarkably well. And within a few short years, the political stable had reduced down to 10 or 12 important parties, many of which are still with us today. and they've gelled around a political culture that is open, uh, and which is inclusive, which allows space for all political persuasions and opinions from left to right, with a large soft center, from moderate Islamic to much more right-wing Islamic, and everything in between. So I think we benefit from that, dare I say.
Mm, mm. Yeah, it's definitely something that's sort of an ever-present theme. And I guess speaking of ever-present themes, it would be also good to hear something. Here's some more views from you about mysticism in Indonesia. I mean, that's something that I remember on my first trip to Indonesia. I was at the alun-alun, the sort of city square in Yogyakarta, and
Yeah.
one of the activities was to blindfold yourself and walk towards these two large trees, and then to touch the tree without being able to see them. And I sort of asked what was the point of this, and then the sort of my friend from Jogja told me that the trees have spirits inside of them. And for me, being from a sort of a very black and white background, I sort of thought this is hard to believe. But as you know, over the years of living in Indonesia and learning about Indonesia, mysticism I've come to know as a huge part of society.
I mean, it's one of the things that drew me in the first place when I was as young as you may have been then, uh, and I read the classical anthropologist Clifford Geertz, Ben Anderson. I also read Neil Smulder, and Neil Smulder was a wonderful researcher and writer. And he wrote many books about social and cultural change in Java, but also Thailand and the Philippines. They give an incredible comparative perspective on change in the 20th century, the late 20th century, across Southeast Asia. He also wrote a book on mysticism in Java, which to me was such an eye-opener. If you couple that together, if you're lucky enough to find a book on Kejawen in English, which I was fortunate enough to find, you these books, those texts, particularly Ben Anderson, and understanding the language of power that he was talking about, and the Clifford Geertz work as well, were incredible eye openers to understand the kinds of things that you're speaking about. So mysticism is it appears to be there. We appear, it's easy to be to fall under this spell that Java is in some way mystic. And I think the Javanese would like us to think that. But in all of that, there is sense in everything. It's just the Indonesian way of seeing sense and appreciating sense might be different to the one that we're used to in our growing up. And I see what you mean when you talk about spirits. I've seen so many contradictions where, and I think I mentioned this to you, and trees in particular, where you see apparently very modern people who are using all the modern trappings of technology and communications and fast-acting instruments, are also still very attached to those very basic beliefs, almost animistic. Their faith in symbols and dates and numbers and an innate sense of what is good and right and what is not, what wouldn't be right to do on a certain day and what would, and none of it equates exactly with any Javanese calendar, but there is a sense of the unknown and what cannot be known, almost, particularly if you're not Javanese and not Indonesian. But I think Jogja in particular and Java embodies that, and you can experience a lot of that here. There is a sense that Indonesian history and culture is somehow mystic in and of itself. But over the years, I think you find it's really just how you how you read it. If you look at what are, the motives of people, and how they view things, what are their priorities? We make assumptions about how we should live our lives and careers and build our families and organize our work, often along very linear lines from A to B. Yet other cultures and societies they see time in a different way, I almost sense, where for them it's much more of a cycle. Things happen at this stage in this way and then move on to another stage. We don't really have much choice over it. We don't really have much control over it. Things happen in and of themselves. And there is a sense that uh, you can pick up in Java that people are working and living to a rhythm that they perceive that we can't, because we're not
mm,
growing up in that culture. And it gives us that
mm,
sense that there is something behind it that we can't perceive. And
mm,
we see that as mystic. But it's another
mm,
way of seeing things. And if you go back to Language and Power, Ben Anderson, and his his definitions how how power is transferred, how language develops, how people see themselves and time, I think that gives us a clue to that kind of slowness that we might perceive in places like Yogyakarta,
mm,
where there really is a sense of a different way of being, which I'm
mm.
drawn to, I must admit.
I mean, even with time, one thing I noticed that often, you know, coming from, somewhere like Australia where we have 4 seasons, I found that in Indonesia, the seasons would be measured by various fruits that were available. It'd be like,
Yeah,
durian season or jumbo season or, this season or that season. So that was something that was fascinating. But yeah, on the mysticism, I remember the first time I saw Kuda Lumping, which for those that don't know what it is, I'm sure Ian's well familiar with this. It's where an individual embodies the spirit of the horse, and this spirit drives them to do almost what things that we see would be crazy, like eating grass, chewing light
uh-huh.
globes, all kinds of crazy things. But
Yeah,
and this was at a school graduation ceremony, and I was sort of shocked. But this sort of thing is quite common,
yeah.
and I can sort of can't can't count how many times that I've had to move a meeting with somebody because someone has seen, a ghost or a spirit, and the event has been moved to another location. And I think it could be easy for people just from the outside to sort of mock these things, but I think you're correct, Ian, in saying that particularly in Java there is a sort of mysticism about it that is different from the rest of the world. But another thing that I will just point out is beyond Java. I mean, even when we talk about the conflict in Sampit in Kalimantan in because I think it was the early 2000s, correct me if I'm wrong, between the Madura and the Dayak people
Mm,
out there.
mm, mm.
All the mysticism and magic around that conflict around people
Yeah,
using blowguns and the darts piercing the side of trucks and killing people. People believe this 100%, but for
they believe
maybe
it.
people from the outside, yeah, it's
Yeah,
sort of farcical.
they believe it. But, flesh is flesh, uh, and it obeys the same rules. So at the end of the day, uh, there was a great deal of violence and people died in their hundreds. And there was nothing mystic about that. There there is a rationalization that can be made, but when there's a motivation, and when a group, particularly an ethnic group, has a motivation to uh, project a certain presentation to another group, they will employ those uh, those cultural instruments to their best effect, and that's what we see, and that's what happened. Too often, horrific effect. We saw the decapitations and all of that too. Yeah. So, yeah, culture can be a very powerful thing.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely. perhaps this example is a bit more on the darker side of mysticism. But
Well, I will
yeah,
tell you, I mean, during those conflicts, the gatherings I spoke of earlier, the proponents of those gatherings, the writer Emha Ainun Najib himself went to West and Central Kalimantan and engaged those communities
mm,
and spoke to them in their thousands. And I remember seeing one of the most well-known posters of Chattanooga of him with a microphone in one hand and a child in the other. And I asked him about he was there in the middle of it all. And this was in the late 90s, early 2000s, a time of great cultural and political change and societal change in Indonesia. But uh, he was uh, he was able and willing to go into those situations and participate and help to resolve those conflicts using dialogue, using culture, using language, using local motifs and instruments to help to resolve those situations.
mm, yeah. When what yeah, to follow up on that, I sort of when it comes to sort of engaging people in Indonesia, how does hospitality sort of flow into this?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned that in my notes, I remember, because it struck me as something. When I first came here, young, single, uh, you know, I felt very proud of myself because I had a small rented house in the kampong, literally in the kampong. It was two levels, two floors, and there were very few houses in the area that were of two floors. So I had one of the best houses in there, but it was deep kampong. You couldn't drive a car outside my
Mhm.
house. You could just about get a motorbike down there. It was uh, it was deep and very basic, and I don't think anyone would be found living in a house like that now.
Which area was it in, out of
This was in
curiosity?
South Jakarta in Radio Dalam, deep behind
Oh,
Radio
okay.
Dalam. Much of that is now gone and built up on. Much of the glorious Pondok Indah and its expanses now cover up where I was living there, but some of it's still there. And I had a great few years there. But I was, hospitality is something that struck me. I'm still in touch with people I knew then, people who, it sounds terrible, people who worked for me, my maid, her children. They were children then. They became mothers. They became grandmothers. They're very fast acting grandmothers, I'll tell you that. I haven't become a grandfather yet, but they were teenagers when I was there, and now they're grandparents. But so they they took me in and looked after me very well in very many ways, and not just a single household, but a community.
Mm,
And there is a sense of warmth and generosity. I don't want to dress it up. I won't say there weren't times where I wasn't concerned uh, for for my well-being or for the well-being of my possessions, but because there are times when you would be. But overall, I had an amazingly positive experience. So much so, I'm still in touch with those communities now, and when I drop by, it's an amazingly warm feeling. But I think in hospitality in Indonesia, particularly to foreigners, if you go by anywhere, you know you you don't expect, and it will be very surprising for me to hear that you'd been dealt with anything, like hostility, even indifference. If you go into an Indonesian community, you're more likely to be hailed, to be welcomed. Someone will speak to you, they'll greet you. They might ask you, "What are you doing?" or "Where are you from?" But it'll be done with warmth and hospitality and genuine inquisitive friendliness, not out of a sense of hostility or alienation or isolation. And with a few vocal inflections from yourself, you'll find yourself very easily invited in for tea, coffee, food, and to come back and do it again and meet other members of a family. And I've known so many people, foreigners like myself and others, who have been taken in, almost adopted by families and communities in that way. And for some, it's been the very basis of their being here. For others, it's something they encounter once and then move on, or for others, they may dip back into it from time to time. But I think hospitality, the receiving of guests, the responsibility and obligation to care for and welcome guests, the privilege of having guests and doing something good for your guests, the best food, the best china, the best spoons, even when it means, you send the kids running out for fruit or cake or something, out to the local warung for you when you're there. People make that kind of effort for you. And weddings that you'll be invited to at, at the flimsiest of excuse, someone in your office, you might not know them very well. You wouldn't expect an intimate invitation to a family gathering, but there you are, and if you show up and you honor them with your presence at a wedding like that, then you'll be front and center. They'll be so proud and happy that you made the effort to grace their event, and you'll have a great time. And I do enjoy that. Over the years, I've enjoyed that a lot, and particularly at the more grassroots end of things, where I've had a very good experience. I guess based on my preferences and cultural activities, though that's where I've found myself most at home.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think yeah, it's also changed my view on hospitality and how maybe I welcome guests. Just some background. I don't know if I ever read into the details about the first time I moved to Indonesia, but when I was there, when I first moved, I moved to Cirebon, and I stayed briefly with a friend from a music community, and he ended up saying, "You don't need to go anywhere. Just stay with me and my family." And I ended up staying with him and his family for 6 months, and
Yeah,
they didn't ask for a penny.
yeah,
It was just they wanted to. It was just them being hospitable
yeah,
and letting me become part of the family. And now when I go back to Cirebon, I go back and see the parents, and I'm still in touch with my friend,
yeah.
and he's married with kids now, and we all sort of keep in touch with how life's sort of going on. But
What a
that
great
really
story.
it was truly lovely, and I have a soft spot for that town because in that
Yeah,
town was a lovely community of people in a music collective I'd been brought into, and they took me in as one of their own. So I think that really changed my view about hospitality and how to treat guests. I think sort of growing up, in Australia and in the culture that I grew up is if someone arrives at the airport, you just tell them the bus to get on and tell them you'll pick them up at the station. Whereas now I say, let me pick you up, stay at my
yeah,
house. If you need somewhere to stay, it's all sorted. And
yeah.
and that and that we did that. I remember when one of my good friends from Jakarta moved to Australia for university, experienced a housing issue. He messaged me and said, "Oh, I asked him how's it going, and he said, "Oh, I'm living in a hostel at the moment. I don't have anywhere to stay. I got kicked out of this house for whatever reason." I said, "You should have told me immediately." I said, "Pack your bags, go stay at my
Hmm.
father's house." And my dad also spent some time living in Indonesia, and I said to him, "Dad, uh, our friend Adam, my friend Adam, he needs a place to stay. Can he stay over?" And he said, "Of course." So, Adam ended up staying at my dad's place for 6 weeks while, even while I wasn't there. So just
Yeah,
that sort of experience of
yep.
learning what hospitality is and being treated in that way, it sort of taught me to sort of pay that forward. And I think that's one lovely thing that I personally have learned as you have from being in Indonesia. Yeah, well, you've mentioned another point, sort of in these notes we sort of exchanged before chatting today, and that was about the street life in Indonesia.
Mm.
Despite the traffic being terrible, there's something that's so powerful and exhilarating about just the street in Indonesia. I remember, over the weekend I was in Jakarta, and as I was going up Sudirman Road, I just loved sort of the sort of 10-second conversations you have with people walking up, all the sort of hawkers on the side of the road peddling their various goods. There's just so much energy. It'd be, yeah, great to hear, what you'd like to explore about this topic.
I'm the same. and Sudirman in particular, and some of the other streets are growing really good street cultures as well. A little bit on all around Seti Budi and Kuningan and all around there as well. But Sudirman has always struck me uh, as a very interesting place, particularly in the evening, just as night is falling and people are out and traffic. The traffic's a, the traffic's there. It's ever present. I guess I've been there so long, I don't think about the traffic being bad anymore. I just, it is, it's the traffic, and you find ways to deal with it. Either you find, you're these days I'm on the MRT a lot of the time. I try and concentrate what I do in business on the MRT route. Otherwise, I'm in and out of the city at times that allow for a commute. I live in the suburbs. I have done for decades. So, I know the right times to come in and out. So I don't get too wrapped up in the traffic, but I do enjoy that street life. And if I've got the opportunity to be on Sudirman, like, anything between 5 and 7, for me, when it's coming alive and you see so many people, particularly if it's a Thursday or Friday and you're moving towards the weekend, you can just walk a kilometer or two and you can just see so much. Little tiny alleyways, absolutely teeming with micro warungs and shops and services of all kind, and office workers some of them dripping with gold and silk and designer clothes and bags, and others, with ragged clothes, with not a penny to their name, but all in those same places, eating that same very basic warung food from those hawkers, and just that the sounds of worship going on. You've got
Mm.
you've got mosques you can hear in the either right up front or in the background. You've got motorbikes going everywhere in all directions, seemingly without any plan. But of course, there's an incredible rationalization. Everyone has a purpose. They know exactly where they're going, and they're not going to bump into anyone else because everyone's got their plan. And key to that is you don't collide with anyone else. You avoid it. You often think about why don't in the West we learn to drive. We have rules about going around roundabouts. We give way, and there are rules about obligations for that. We don't have the same rules here, and you might easily think there aren't any rules. That it's chaos, it's anarchy, but it's not. It's just controlled in a different way. It's consensual. Uh, people just people go to the absolute limit to where they can, and then they stop, and they'll let someone else go until they can. It's a kind of controlled brinksmanship, and it functions just as giving way does in the West. But you see also all the animal life of cats and dogs and all these kinds of things, and little ponds and koi fish in neighborhoods. I mean, neighborhoods too. The older neighborhoods and younger neighborhoods, which are maturing, develop into this as well, where you have people coming out, and this happens in the suburbs as well. People come out in the evening, they talk. Increasingly these days, they'll walk in some attempt at fitness. They might even jog. They'll be smoking as well, but there might be some kind of attempt at some kind of mobility and fitness, but they'll talk and they'll sit and they'll drink coffee, and there'll be, someone will have a stall there on a couple of wheels selling some kind of very basic food, whether it's siomay or bakso or nasi goreng or something like that. And you see all this activity going on the streets and very close to these major streets, and I saw it in Bangkok as well to a degree. You can go down Sukhumvit for tens of kilometers, and you see the glass and steel towers of these amazing office blocks, and right by them is this like mom and pop store selling tin cans and plastic and towels and cloth and cotton reels and aluminium foil and all these kinds of basics at a level of the economy the nth degree of what its neighbor might be. And it's the same in Jakarta. You see this mix of economy, this eclectic mix of community, all on this, linear development of Sudirman in particular. And it's Sudirman that does it for me. And often when I go to a gathering on a Friday evening after work, for example, that's my time. I'll deliberately take the time to walk. And I walk from my office now. At that time, I walked down Casablanca from my office in Mega Kuningan down to the MRT stop. And I love that walk. I'll see the same people every evening on the same benches, the same tissue sellers, the same motorbike drivers helping people cross the road and picking up fares, the same beggars, the same refuse collectors with their vans, and I go past the same stores and the same people see me and greet me. It's basic, but I value that engagement at that level and enjoy it very much and miss it when I don't have that. When I used to take buses and before the MRT and before the busway, I would take a particular
Is
bus
this the
from the
Metro Mini that
suburbs.
you're talking about, Ian?
Sorry?
Is this the Metro Mini that you're talking about and the
I
Kopaja?
did take those in the past, yes. But then I moved out to the suburbs and I would take a bus into town and it would stop at Ratu Plaza. And it was my greatest pleasure every day to see the same newspaper seller every day there. This is when the days of newspapers, it doesn't seem so long ago, there aren't any now. But he would have all the newspapers spread out at the bus stop at Ratu Plaza and you could pick something. I used to read Gatra, so I would get Gatra. I loved Gatra magazine in those years, or something else. And I was so sorry when that stopped, and I no longer saw him. And that culture disappeared. Of those magazine sellers and booksellers. I remember when I was first here in the very early 90s, certain books you couldn't get. You couldn't get the books of Pramudia, for example, Pramudia Anantatur, the writer of Bumi Manusia, for example, This Earth of Mankind, and all of the other literature that had been banned by the New Order under Suharto. But you could buy them on the street, and you could buy them on the footbridges, which they were starting to build across Sudirman. So on the footbridges, you'll find little pitches of goods and little stalls and shops, and some of them would sell books, often these forbidden books that you could buy. So the street life has always been something I've enjoyed, and I guess it blends into those gatherings when, fortunately, my wife tolerates me doing this kind of thing and believes me when I tell her where I've been. Because sometimes, it can be all night. And these days, I'm not in my 20s anymore. If I'm out on a Friday night until the early hours of the morning, I feel it for the rest of the weekend, especially when you're sitting down cross-legged on concrete. I don't do that so well anymore, It doesn't suit my bones.
Yeah, that's. I mean, seems like there's a common thread going through all of these topics, and I think something that springs to mind, and something that I think that you've mentioned before is about balance. Whether it's the sort of chaos on the
Yeah.
streets, whether it's gathering, whether it's hospitality, mysticism. It seems like there is a sort of balance in Indonesia in culture in Indonesia, which keeps everything sort of humming and ticking along.
I think I think there is, and I didn't know that until I experienced it myself, and it didn't come quickly. I wasn't always as blasé as I might appear now. I wasn't always as centered as I might appear now. Uh, this came with years of being here, but I was glad it did come. But there is a balance here. You there's a certain there's a pace. You can't force things here. You can't force a result. You have to give it its due time. It will come in its own time. You need to learn patience. You need to learn that things often literally cannot be rushed. They will take their own time. Uh, it's not because people don't want to help you and they don't want to do things fast, but their innate instinct seems to be to want to continue to achieve harmony with something rather than complete it. You know, we're always looking to finish things and move on to the next. By we, I mean those of us who are born outside this culture. But here, there's a sense of we're all continuing, moving along on the same level, and things happen at a slower pace. Things happen in a more circular fashion, much less of an A to Z fashion. So you learn balance, and if you don't, you'll suffer because you'll be impatient and you'll be bad-tempered and you'll be intolerant. And I probably was all of those things at different times in different ways, but hopefully a little bit less so now after all these years. And hopefully, I can, if anyone's listening, then they can get the benefit of the lessons I learned the hard way. But balance comes, and equilibrium comes, and calm comes with it, and just the ability to enjoy the quiet and enjoy the silence. One of the most important poems of the writer I was speaking about earlier, the writer M. Najib, was a poem called Jalan Sunyi, or the silent path, or the way of silence, which talks. It's a short poem which is set to music, and it talks about a spiritual, metaphysical yearning in a sophistic way, in a religious way, in an Islamic way, in a deeply spiritual way. But it's about silence, and it's about valuing silence and not wishing to have the noise and not needing the noise, taking solace in the silence that you can achieve through, for the Sufi Muslim, union with God, for example, which you can also attain through the gatherings that I was speaking about earlier, through deep chanting, through deep resonance of reading extracts from the Quran. These help the adherents of those practices achieve a transformative state that they seek to achieve, a oneness with God, and that's what they achieve in these gatherings. You might not notice that if you come as an outsider. You might not see that at all. You might just see a couple of thousand people enjoying dialogue, music, and poetry seated on the floor with tea and coffee. But there's a subset of language going on below that, which is calm, which is silent. And that poem is what inspired me to write a book called Jalan Sunyi Emha, or The Silent Path of Emha Ainun Najib, the writer. And that was his a biography of his life and work, which I wrote 20 years ago on his life and work for Kompas Gramedia. It's about him, it's about his life, it's about that gathering, its impact on 1998 and the years that followed, about the Gamelan Fusion Orchestra that worked with him and still do to this day, that you can still see around Java, performing every day somewhere different, a couple of times a week at least, right through Java. If you asked me at the very beginning, or in 1992 when I first arrived, would I still be here in 2026, and what would it take for me still to be here, then my wife would tell me it's because of her. I'm here because of her, and yeah, that's true. And we had a family, and I love that. But she's not here right now, so I can say that besides the work which followed the study very easily for me, and I was very fortunate to have that experience of my studies set me up for this work so well. My first set of studies in the 80s, which got me here in the 90s. my second set of studies in the early 2000s, which kept me here until now, and I'll call it work, my activities, my participation in the fields of art and culture and literature, which I still do now, which you can find if you look for it, but I don't kind of publicize it too much. It's not something you see much of on LinkedIn or those kinds of circles. I keep the professional life separate. But if you go into the art and culture side, you'll see a lot of it. But if you go into what I do professionally, you won't see any of it. But that's the kind of thing that's kept me here. These lessons, these experiences, these sensory perceptions, the books that I've learned from, Niels Mulder, Ben Anderson, the literature, Pramudia, my daughter going through school here and reading Pramudia again through her. That was a revelation in itself, and a great pleasure to see a child go through school and witnessing that here in Indonesia. And she went to Global Jaya and had a very good experience there. And I was glad of that experience too, of the access I got to the school authorities there and to her education. We only had one, so I'm fixated on her. Yeah,
That's yeah, Ian.
but
This
yeah,
has been
calm, balance. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. I've got it. I wrote down these points. Yeah, silence, patience, enjoying the quiet, calm. I think you've led a fascinating life. And yeah, your time in Indonesia is I think different from a lot of foreigners who have lived there. I think that you really truly embraced the culture and gone above and beyond to sort of explore the inner workings, facets of the place.
you make it sound like it was an active thing. You make it sound like it's something I deliberately set out to do. You know, it almost sounds like that. But actually, you know, I got my cues and then it kind of just, it came upon me, you know. Yeah, there were some things I sought out, but much of it just happened through being here. And that was the joy of it. Now I get to direct it a lot more, but it happened and I was glad of it.
Yeah, yeah, that's good to hear. I feel like Indonesia is definitely one of those places where you can be sort of swept. If you want to passively experience things, you can just let it sort of sweep you along and experience things like that rather than actively trying to go out and search things. It's really, yeah, open for interpretation, if you will. But look, thanks so
Yeah,
much for
there's
talking to me today. This has been really interesting. I've got some things to do next time in town. I'll have to join you to one of these gatherings on the Friday. It
I'll let
sounds
you know.
fascinating. Yeah, I'd love to join. And yeah, I'm
Good.
glad that we got
There's
to
a lot
speak
of
about
people
these
coming
things.
next time. Yeah.
Oh, perfect, perfect,
Yeah.
perfect. I'll definitely be there. And I
Yeah.
think this has been a really interesting
Yeah.
chat and a bit different to our typical
Thank
conversations, which
you.
tend to revolve, solely around politics and business. So this has been, yeah, super
Now I
insightful.
feel bad. I feel I should have been doing that.
No, no, no. This is much more interesting. This is much more interesting. But yeah, thank you very much for your time to Ian today. It's been great.
We'll do another one on the politics another time.
I look forward to it. I look forward to it. Okay. Thank you very much, Ian. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.